Thank you, folks, for clicking on the video. If you'd like to be informed when new videos go live, please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that bell notification icon. Please feel free to like, comment, and share the video with family and friends, as it really does help the channel grow in the current YouTube algorithm structure. So hello everybody and welcome back to Swamp Dog Games. Today I have Jean-Luc of the Dungeon Key and Todd of the Hexed Press with me tonight. How are you guys doing?
Great. How are you?
Great.
Outstanding.
Thanks so much, Dave, for having us.
Outstanding. So we're here today to talk about your latest, or is this your latest or your first Kickstarter?
Latest, actually. So
Latest.
it's the second Kickstarter, in fact, and it's the second time we're doing Kavlov Sanctuary as well. So it's kind of back to back.
Yes, but this time the original release was for Morkborg. We'll get into that a little bit later, and this time you're going for Old School Essentials, correct?
You got it, yeah, and that's why
Outstanding.
we've got Todd here to give us a hand with that conversion.
Outstanding. Which, anyone who's watching this on YouTube, the link for the Kickstarter will be in the description down below, as well as the pinned comment. But first off, please tell me a little bit about your guys' selves. How did you guys meet? How did you get into playing RPGs?
Sure. I mean, Todd, if you don't mind, I'll kind of get started here, and then I'll
Yeah,
turn it
go
over to
for it.
you. As far as like getting started with RPGs, I started at a relatively young age. 10 to 12. We tried to play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm by no means sort of like this old school veteran who's been playing for over 20 years. We tried as kids to get started, but we could never really get a solid group together. And it wasn't until I was in my early to mid 20s that I was finally able to kind of play a bit, and I started GMing mostly for fourth edition, and then from there, I moved on to fifth edition, and was able to get a group together for a little over 3 years. So we ran, like a 2-year campaign, and then ran in another campaign after that. Yeah, so that's pretty much where I come from. And of course, I met Todd more recently, as I was exploring, doing a conversion of Kavlov Sanctuary from Morkborg to OSC, and I was branching away from Dungeons and Dragons, primarily like the fifth edition stuff, to delve into kind of smaller, more indie and OSR style games. And I'd been relying on Todd's content quite a bit, actually, as I was exploring the conversion myself. Then it just, kind of struck me that I should reach out to him and see, what he was up to, and see if he would be interested. So, Todd, I'll just kind of turn over to you from there.
Sure. My own just kind of personal history of the game. I started playing around the early '80s, starting with the basic expert box, but very quickly, so quickly that I don't really remember the order I'm having. Them. I think a lot of us had similar experiences having a mixture of BX, maybe Holmes in there. I didn't have Holmes at the time, but I definitely had BX and sort of AD&D books, and then just playing some strange our own personal amalgamation of those materials, and then just never stopped playing over the years. And then so I started the channel. I want to say it's 4 or 5 years ago now, and just been kind of making content on YouTube and working on my own stuff. And then, as Jean-Luc said, he reached out to me about working on this conversion with him, and it's been an awesome project, and I'm really happy he did.
Outstanding. Now, is there any history behind the names, like in your case, the Dungeon's Key and then the Hex Press?
It's an interesting question. The Dungeons Key for me actually stems from a blog that I started in like 2017. I was actually converting Hero Quest, like the board game, and like I was actually 3D printing the pieces before the Hasbro remade it recently as a crowdfunding game. It was very difficult to get my hands on a physical copy, and if I wanted to get like a complete set, I'd have to find something on eBay. And so the Dungeons Key for me was actually just the title for a blog I gave myself as I sort of explored 3D printing, and 3D modeling and stuff like that, um, just for that one project, and it sort of just faded away. And it wasn't until more recently when I started publishing on Drive to RPG, for Morkborg and Death in Space, that I'd kind of picked that name back up again, as I thought I had to, give myself a publisher name. So that's really the history for me of where that comes from. It's just from having started a small, blog for HeroQuest and my 3D printing experience, and then it led to that.
For me, Hex Press comes from kind of a play on words. I wanted to express my enjoyment and love of hex crawling and hex maps, and that a part of playing that I felt was maybe underserved a little bit and misunderstood. And I wanted help with that, so I picked Hex Press to sort of, I guess, symbolize that part of my love of that part of role playing.
As you bring up about hex crawling, thought at one point I knew a lot of RPGs and about RPGs, and then I started this channel. I was like, man, I don't even have 1% of the knowledge out there, and was recently getting introduced to, or I should say, I guess, reintroduced to the concept of hex crawling, and it's such a fascinating topic to me. It's kind of like, why is this such a sort of underground niche aspect of the D&D hobby? It seems is it we just got too used to like the modules from that WotC was publishing. Like, in your view, why is that seem not as like a core element the way it used to be?
Oh man, how many hours do we have to talk about this? I think things just moved into kind of a narrative direction, right? The original people playing the game played it in a much more, from what I understand, hex crawling kind of fashion. Things on a map using originally the outdoor survival map, which was itself a hex map, then making their own maps. But I think the rise of the adventure module in the 80s, I think, just moved things in a narrative direction, and a lot of people started seeing some of the things I think are good quality hex crawls as things they wanted to avoid. Why do we want to engage with the stuff that isn't directly on in the story, right? And so, of course, you just want to. Why do we want to be in the woods? We just want to get back to. We want to get to the town, or we want to get to the dungeon. And why do we want to kind of go back and forth? But I think part of my whole thing, and which has also led to my rediscovery of old school role playing in OSR, was that a lot of that stuff that we've hand waved away, I think, was in some sense throwing away the baby with the bathwater, right? There's a lot of really fun elements there that we just sort of kept tossing away, and then folks were kind of rediscovering, hey, this stuff was actually pretty good. Of course, some folks were playing this way all along and never stopped, but for the rest of us, we kind of either discovered it for the first time or rediscovered our love for those kind of modes of play that had fallen out of fashion.
Yeah, I think for me, in that regards, I think that it's kind of about making the journey part of the adventure, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that there's a lot to be said for point crawling as well, going from one point of interest to another. But I think that, what I suspect happened, and I think in a lot of groups, especially sort of like newer groups, they lose themselves sort of like in this sort of traveling mode where, maybe newer GMs just you kind of suffer a little bit when it comes to trying to make traveling exciting. And there's a lot of really great YouTubers that, kind of address that topic as a whole, how to make traveling more exciting. And I think that, at least I'm seeing a resurgence in sort of hex crawling a little bit, if you're, scrolling Lemmy or Reddit or other social media platforms, especially in the solo RPG scene as well, right? You've got kind of like these journaling solo RPGs making a comeback where you have to, create the map as you play and then sort of discover the world that way. So from a hex crawling perspective, I was really, really tempted actually to make, Kavlov's a hex crawl. But sort of opted against it just because of my sort of lack of experience in sort of those kind of that area.
Now, with Kavlov and you talking about OSR, you both went from sort of different ends of like the D&D spectrum, the old AD&D/BX era to 4th edition, which I know I have the imagination my friends get yelling in my ear about their hatred of 4th because I came from 3rd.
Yep.
What made you, though, want to make this with Morkborg as your starting rule for the original version of this adventure? Because as an OSC module, that one seemed to go like really far out there. I know the combat rules are the same, but it's one of the most different versions of the OSR hobby that I've seen out there.
So I got into Morkborg primarily through a podcast or media network called the Glass Cannon Network. I've been listening to their stuff for quite some time. A fantastic bunch, and they primarily play, 1st and 2nd edition Pathfinder. But their network grew to such a degree that at one point they were doing actual plays of other games and kind of just testing them out. And I came across Morkborg just as one of my campaigns were in fifth edition was kind of wrapping up, and we'd all talked about how we wanted to sort of explore other games and other systems, and I'd always had this sort of this nostalgia for sort of classic, BX style OSR D&D. I knew of it, and I grew up wanting to play it, but never got around to it. Never got a group. So when I caught their actual play of Morkborg, and let me tell you, these guys are just incredible at what they do. Practically Shakespearean. Like just acting, and it just blew my mind how something could be so simple and just so simple, and also kind of gruesome, so over the top, kind of satirical. It was just so different from what I found in kind of classic, fifth edition, that I fell in love with Morkborg right away, and all I wanted to do was to create content for it, let alone play it. So that for me is kind of where I got into Morkborg personally.
And yourself, Todd? Or
Oh well, I mean, Morkborg is one of the more definitely interesting rule sets that I've read in terms of the OSR sphere. I think its strength is that it really had a very strong vision, and not only did it have a very strong vision, it had a design and that everything basically fed into that, right? So unlike some other books, I think that Morkborg really just singularly had this kind of, okay, this is the kind of game we are, and everything from the rules and the mechanics to also how we're going to present them is going to reinforce this kind of game. And I think it really struck a chord with folks who maybe were looking for something a little bit different than either your sort of vanilla Western fantasy or some of the other maybe kind of, I don't want to say goofier, but sort of maybe more kind of zany approach, right? They decided to go kind of dark and grim, but with sort of a little bit of a comic touch. It's not super grim dark, I don't think, but just that kind of, I think, that sort of death metal type aesthetic, and they nailed it, and it's been super successful. And I think it kept a really simple, clean rule set underneath that aesthetic that has allowed it to be adapted. That we've seen, Pirate Borg and Court Borg and all these different things. It's really exploded.
Yeah, and I think the fact that I think it's just there's a lot to be said for the fact that it's not nearly mechanically dead or crunch, if you will, as the other system. So it kind of opened the door, as Dungeons and Dragons was kind of like in the limelight more and more with the movie coming out. It featured in with not, I was going to say Strange Aeons, but Stranger Things and stuff like that. So I just want to say that it was kind of perfect timing on the Morkborg part to kind of roll out something that was both as appealing, but also as rules light as it is, kind of got a lot of traction that way as well. At least was one of the reasons I thought that it was great. That anybody could just sort of pick it up and play within probably 15 minutes of just getting their hands on the book.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to fully read the book, but I watched Professor Dungeon Master do his review on it. It's definitely on the shorter side, but yet still looks very easy to get into compared to some of the other ones. I know recently...
Lost.
Uh-oh. Am I back yet? See, this is why I wanted to record it, just in case. So. Nuts. Oh, are we back there?
A little bit, yep. Okay. There we are.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. So my only experience with Morkborg was looking at Professor Dungeon Master's review of it. But out of all the books, it was definitely condensed out of all the OSR style, but definitely seemed like that you could just get going with that book without much hassle.
I think the only hassle really is reading the book. Like unless you've got they've got a bare bones edition, if you will, like an SRD that's much.
And now it's freezing again.
Crazy, they've got, the player character creation is spread over, the entire book. Go from one section to another and back.
on a second. Let me just check this here. This.
Oh, may have lost you again, Dave.
Yeah. I have good internet too. I don't understand why it's doing this tonight, especially after I turned off my data hog. Okay, let me see here. I don't think. It says it's plugged in. It should be good. Okay. Alrighty. But yeah, that was the one downside looking at Morkborg was its art style. Just put everything just like all over the place. So following through point to point to point. Like, I know I'm sort of like the oddball that I could look at an actuary table and find it fun, but I like that more streamlined data presentation in a more traditional RPG compared to the way Morkborg does it in the book. But once you get over that artistic style presentation of the rules, it does seem relatively easy to pick up, which is something that I'm glad that in as far as Kavlov, your presentation stuck to a much more traditional approach in terms of artistically displaying the information in it.
That's exactly right. And don't get me wrong. I've created several Morkborg modules that follow sort of in line with that sort of doom metal, ultra violent graphics, type layout. But especially for a campaign module, something that is going to be over 80 pages long, that is intended for longer style plays, campaigns that can last anywhere from 6 months to a few years. I want to make sure that the language I use and the layout I use was as articulate as possible to kind of give the GM like a proper toolbox, right? Don't get me wrong, I still think that in some degrees, the Kavlov Sanctuary is kind of a work of art in that regards, but not quite as much as something like Morkborg, which took a lot more creative liberties. It's a trade-off, though, right? Readability and versus usability. And I want to focus primarily on creating something that was, usable at the table as much as possible for the players and the GM, mind you.
Which, since we've been talking a little bit about artistic presentation, I'll stay on the artwork for a little while. Despite this being, if this were a movie rating, I guess the content-wise would be an R, but visually the art is not that bad. It's definitely evoking that sort of horror that you seem to be aiming for in here, but is it so over the top that I couldn't have this around and be worried about somebody seeing something and getting upset with it, which is nice. Now, all of this artwork that's internally, who did you go through for that?
So the art actually was done by my partner. Okay. Annabelle is someone I've kind of turned to, actually, funny enough, to do some of the art for some of the modules I've worked on, and sort of other sort of creative avenues. Mainly because I just absolutely love the work that she does. So she did all the line art, and I kind of did all of the digital. I digitized it and kind of filled in the details a little bit. So it was a sort of like a joint venture, the two of us together. But at the end of the day, art is also rather expensive, and especially with having not done a Kickstarter prior to Kavlov Sanctuary, I wasn't sure what I could what sort of interest there would be for a book like this. So I have a full-time job, this is the Dungeons Key is something that I've done as a hobby for the most part, just to kind of as a creative outlet. So working with my partner, I said, well, at the very least I can pay you a little bit, but I couldn't actually afford working with professional artists to do the art. And I personally think that the art in the book came out amazing. I was so pleased with the work that she did and the work that we did. And then when we saw how successful the Kickstarter was, I was actually able to give her to pay her more, actually, as a result of that. But it's also opened up the door for me to reach out to other artists and to work with them as well.
That's nice. Yeah, because the artwork in here definitely gives this sort of old school feel. I would say it kind of reminds me of some of the works that you see in I think the Basic Fantasy line, some of that, and it definitely evokes that sort of old school style. It definitely comes across very well, and I'm glad that was able to digitize so well. I have a friend that refuses to to use digital tools for his, and we still can't get his art to digitize that well. But speaking of the art, I know you had said that there was one piece that you did do digital, and that you were really happy though that the next Kickstarter was going to allow you to do an all professional artist
Yeah,
artwork
that's
for the
right.
next one,
And
correct?
honestly, I'm glad you bring that up because it's one of those sort of sensitive topics that, can or controversial, maybe. So the front and back cover for Kavlos Sanctuary, the Morkborg edition,
Hmm.
that's right, that you see there, what was made using, what was made with the help of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right, tools like Midjourney and stuff like this. And I know that not everybody supports this style of creation. As I mentioned, for me, having very little to no budget to work with and wanting to try to put out something that was relatively high quality, that was a tool that I leaned on, for this one project. But I'm glad to say that I'm able to move away from that now as a result of the growth that the Dungeon Ski has had in the last say 6 months as a result of Kevlar Sanctuary, and some of the other work that I'm doing. So yeah. Again, I know that it's one of those things that not everybody agrees with, and we advertise the book as having artificial intelligence art on it in it. We have that in the right in the kind of the art credits as well. And so if anybody disagrees with this, it's completely up to them. And of course, we advertise it, so if they don't want to support projects that have that kind of art in it, they don't have to. And
But
so, and we won't fault anybody for that.
in the end, all the more reason why to get the OSE version, right? So
Absolutely, no. It's a great segue into the OSC edition because I was able to work with a new artist to do a full cover, and it just came out amazing. We kind of a beautiful cross between what you typically find for Morkborg and OSC. It was a great mesh of the two styles. Couldn't be happier.
now I know I'm not going to be able to share it on this screen, but right now I have the tweet that you had originally set out on screen with the OSE cover on it, to demonstrate what it looks like. And
Yes.
I know I've got below that the two images. One of the hole in the oak, which is from I believe the official OSE
Yeah, Necrotic
people,
Gnome.
and then the Morkborg cover right next to it. And when you compare the two, this is something definitely an AI wouldn't be able to do. This type of nice mix up between those two, I would say, wildly different art styles, and it comes across very nicely on here.
Yeah. So for this cover in particular, I'm trying. I want to make sure I get the name correctly. We worked with an artist by the name of Lucas Pawinski. So I apologize to Lucas if I'm mispronouncing his name, aka Vault Crawler. Or at Vault Crawler on Instagram, and a phenomenal artist. Super patient with me. As someone who hadn't really had an opportunity to work with very many professional artists, sometimes getting it just right or providing critical or constructive feedback could be quite challenging. So he was fantastic. He took all of our feedback, and it was just such a pleasant experience. We're pleased to say actually that we've got a stretch goal in the upcoming OSC Kickstarter campaign to also redo all of the filler line art by Lucas. But that's yeah, folks will have to see what that looks like when they click on the page and see how far down the stretch goal is.
But I would have to say I'd be sad to see like these eyeballs go, because this was one of my favorite pieces internally. So I'll be sad that if this goes in the new version.
Oh, I know. We'll have to see. I think right now the plan is to try to keep as much of, if not all of the art that we already have, or to convert it, to have Lucas kind of redraw it,
Okay.
sort of like for like, the same composition, but just in their own art style.
Hmm.
So hopefully nothing will be missed. It's one of those things when you're kind of converting somebody to OSC. What we're finding now is that like the stat blocks and things like that are considerably larger for OSC, and so then the page count just kind of goes up, and then as a result, the layout's going to change. So it's possible that there might be new art added, or some of the art might be moved around in such a way, to accommodate for all of these sorts of things as well.
Now, why did you decide to go with Old School Essentials for your new one compared to any of the other OSR products out there?
I think it's the fit and finish of it, and sort of the popularity of it. There's tons of different games that could have gone with, like Basic Fantasy. Is it like Swords and Sorcery and all of
Hmm.
these, and even to some degree, I've been really meaning to look at, like Into the Odd and stuff like that, and other sort of kind of uh, OSR style, or NSR style games. And yeah, I don't know. OSC just called to me. I mentioned that it was nostalgic for me to kind of work with sort of a classic D&D. It's not really nostalgic. I never really experienced that as a child, but for me anyway, it was about kind of getting back to my roots. I want to experience Dungeons and Dragons as it was sort of intended when it was first created by Gygax and the rest of the folks there. So for me, it was sort of like a no brainer. The fact that the fit and finish of the Necrotic Gnomes products were so great, that they've had such tremendous success, and they seem to be kind of appealing to a lot of folks on social media. For me, like, it was as much of a personal decision as it was a business decision. It just seems to be like one of the modules that was really picking up the most legs in that regard. And of course, having someone to work with like Todd, I think, meant, that, I could lean on someone quite a bit to kind of to help me in that regard. And I've read the old school essentials books cover to cover many times, but until you've GM'd a game, I think it's difficult to write content for something because sometimes you still feel a little out of your element. So having Todd's expertise there has just been incredibly helpful.
Nice. Speaking of GM, recently to help cross promote, you also did a full live adventure session with the OSE version, correct?
Absolutely.
And that was primarily focused on, what was it, Dungeon B with the cannibals, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, I know that I can
Cannibals
turn it over to
Den.
Todd. That's right, because Todd worked his magic as a GM and just as a showman. Really did a tremendous job. So I don't know, Todd, if there's anything you can add. You've got a couple videos on your channel. First, for
I do.
prepping the game, and also for the breakdown of after how that went. So maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you go to Hex Press on YouTube, I did a stream where I went over the prep kind of beforehand. I didn't cover everything that I changed, and some things I just kind of had to muddle through my own accidents and misreadings and mishaps. And then I did sort of a post mortem when I went through it. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I think in terms of old school essentials, if you look inside the module and look at that map, it's really so reminiscent of the Keep on the Borderlands.
Mm-hmm.
That a system that's at least BX or BX adjacent seems like a natural fit for it. And the module has a similar style to that, right? Where you have a sort of a safe place, a sanctuary, and then you have kind of dangerous place in hills, which is much like the Caves of Chaos are in hills, also caves sort of nearby, and then a little, just a nice soupçon of wilderness in between them. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had four players all together.
Mm-hmm.
I think it did get to show off a little bit of the classes, which we wanted to and to do. And we had a couple of PC deaths. One like right in the beginning that thankfully Jean-Luc was able to use one of his character's powers to sort of circumvent a little bit, and then one.
Mind you, not rules as written, but rules as intended, or the rule of fun, if you will. I mean, being able to resurrect someone from the dead at first level is a bit overpowered, I think. But it was an actual play to showcase the system and the adventure more than anything. So I hope people understand.
But I think the big takeaway was it was a lot of fun, and it kind of showed what you can
really
do with this sort of sandboxy thing. I think the only things that I really did is I moved a couple of things around. Jean-Luc thought that I had done it just for him, but I'd done it because I had a little bit of a goof in the beginning, and on the fly I had to swap some rooms around, but it was easy to do. And then just adding a little bit more structure, as you have to have in kind of a one-shot than you might in sort of one of those old school adventures where you basically just got to get the run of the land. Obviously, we were trying to do something in somewhat like I was on my streams, I was kind of saying it's similar to running a con game where if you were playing in the campaign, you might let it be wide open and let people meander. But when you only have a single 3 to 4 hour time slot for folks, is you need to build that narrative. So I just took the material that's in the module and just kind of created a little narrative out of that, and then let them loose. They did a great job.
I can add to that a little bit too, because I think what Todd did, in fact, kind of highlights sort of the the design of Kavlov Sanctuary, and that like he used it perfectly in that like it's intended to be incredibly flexible. It's a sandbox, and so yes, you can absolutely run long formatted campaigns in the book, but at the end of the day, the book in and of itself has really no narrative other than for the very 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 high level. Kavlov was the sorcerer who defeated this devil Balthazar, and there's some kind of high level plot there, but otherwise, GMs are really supposed to use this as a tool, as a guide for creating their own adventures and driving player agency. And so the fact that Todd was able to kind of take what I put in the book and kind of flip it on its head to the point where even I, as the author of Kavlov Sanctuary, didn't recognize what was taking place. I mean, I could recognize elements of what was taking place, but that for me, it felt like a brand new adventure that I hadn't written myself, and even if it was an accident, that Todd had to swap some rooms around. I mean, it highlights again the flexibility of these dungeons where you can move one room to another and back and forth. So a huge kudos to Todd there for the way that he ran that module, because it was perfect in my mind. I couldn't have asked for a better session.
I take it the mouse left you guys alone during that session as well. But
No mouse.
I know the first one you were having some issues with the mouse.
Yeah, well, you can if you folks are interested. I had some dealings with some mice in the house, and I had to go full heal on the mice. But thankfully, I finally seemed to keep them at bay, at least over the course of that stream.
Oh, yeah, took me a second, but if I can get it, I like the abstract nature of the sanctuary itself, especially as one who can get like lost in the map. But you got all the familiar sites necessary in a Keep on the Borderlands style adventure, which is really nice in here.
Yeah, one of the things that in that regard that I thought was kind of interesting is, so as sort of prep work that I did for Kavlov Sanctuary, I knew I wanted to create something that was very similar or reminiscent of B2 Keep on the Borderlands. Like for me, that was or is one of the quintessential adventures. I'd read that cover to cover many times, even before getting into Morkborg and publishing content. It was just one of those adventures that you just kind of hear about in the OSR and D&D world, much like is it the Tombs of Horror and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just it's a staple in TTRPGs. And so I leaned a lot on that book, and of course I did reread it as I worked on Kavlov's, and like just the fact that, for instance, that none of the NPCs have names. It's just such a fun and interesting way. And some people might think that they're being cheated out of something like that. They buy a full-blown setting and you don't have names for the blacksmith or what have you, or it's just kind of titles more than anything, right? The master of rituals and things like that. So but I really love this idea that it's not there to be a story or narrative. It's really intended for you to design on top of, and to kind of create your own world. So it fits into any setting. And I think that although we're creating this for OSC, anybody in the OSR world, and frankly speaking, someone could have just as easily picked up the Morkborg edition and converted it to whatever system they want, right? It's that flexible. So really pleased with the way that came out as well.
Yeah, while looking through here, did stand out quite a bit when you compare, as you said, to the classics like Keep on the Borderland. That is in what most people's mind is going to be the quintessential sandbox adventure. Yours, it to me, is less sandbox and more framework, where it's just here's the base setting, and then it really encourages the game master and the players to really put their world built on top of it, compared to a traditional sandbox where it gives you that safe play area that everybody's inhabiting. This one really wants that GM to individualize this adventure more, so it seems, and that's a benefit of the sort of lack of some of the hard world building that happens in a traditional sandbox.
Yeah, no, and it's a great way of putting it, actually. That's an excellent point.
Yeah. Now, what was the inspiration in here for the Bog Witch? It's interesting that you have, it seems like from a traditionalist perspective, all of your artifacts behind the Bog Witch, with a very interesting fetch quests required to unlock all of this. So.
Yeah. So and this is where a lot of the design for Kavlov's kind of reveals itself in that, and I talk about it in a little bit. There's a one-page guide, if you will, right at the start of the book that
Hmm.
talks about some of the recommendations I have for GMs and players. And one of the things that comes up a little bit more frequently in games like Morkborg is the fact that there's not a ton of campaign modules or long drawn campaigns or settings for Morkborg. There's a lot of one shots and stuff like this. So it's not to say that there are no other campaigns. This is just one of a few that exists in the community. But one of the concerns that a lot of folks have is that unlike in traditional D&D or sort of OSR games where you have a relatively fleshed out level progression, Morkborg doesn't really have that. I mean, you can gain a little bit of HP, but in fact, in Morkborg, when you improve, you could even lose a little bit of HP. So you're not gaining, the tons and tons of levels. It's not about leveling. And so how do you make a game or a campaign setting that keeps the players engaged? And that was one of those things, right? So I've got a bunch of items in the book, that you can use to resuscitate players, increase your stats, gain temporary HP and things like that. And so there's the Bog Witch, which kind of, again, you mentioned the fetch quest, so that's true. You can't spend silver or gold or platinum purchasing those items. They're all fetch quests, and it's the idea that those fetch quests encourage exploration, right? And so that as you explore, you find things that you're looking for, and then you might have a list of things that that you want to find. So over time, as you play the game, you can go back to the Bog Witch, and to unlock more powerful items. So it's kind of to reward exploration more than anything, and also to kind of give the GM kind of some hooks to some degree. Again, you don't have to have everything behind a paywall, right? You could take some of the artifacts that I've created for the Bog Witch and just give them to the players as a GM. But again, it could be for a quest, it could be for any other number of things. So that's where having content like that comes into play. And there's also a genie's lamp as well that does something very similar, where that is really a list of things that you have to collect, that the genie requests, and if you do that, then he will sort of grant you this powerful artifact. So as much as possible, I try to make sure that players and GMs had tools to reward exploration.
I know we had talked previously, as you mentioned, about the relatively flat power advancement in Morkboard. That was something that I had a little bit of a hard time wrapping my head around with how the classes were presented in here. I know this is a holdover for me when thinking about the traditional Keep on the Borderlands, how you have, even though it lets the players go into areas they shouldn't, there's still an expected progression curve in a more traditional D&D style module, where the higher up the mountainside you go, the more difficult it is. And here with Morkborg, I know that was what surprised me at first. I was like, okay, why do all of these seem relatively the same power level? And then having to remember that Morkborg doesn't have the same power progression system that I'm familiar with. So in here, everyone can go into pretty much anywhere and it's up to the GM to determine how to modify the power level. Is that going to still be the same in the OSE version, or are you going to be going a more traditional, the higher up the mountainside you go, the more difficult approach?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things I think that I'm working with Todd on. Although we haven't discussed it explicitly, yeah, we absolutely have to make sure that, especially in a game like with OSC or other sort of OSR or D&D clones, you want to try to balance out the experience and the difficulty to scale. But in some regards, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to make it completely balanced. In B2 Keep on the Borderland, I think one of the first things you can do is run into like a third level thief who can just absolutely just one tap you. Just one shot you, and that's it. And you can run into a dragon at any level, right? In sort of OSC, and it's sort of up to the players to come up with creative solutions for how to get around that. It doesn't have to be fighting all the time. With that said, though, I mean, I the game Catalog Sanctuary, even for Morkborg, although it isn't immediately obvious, does scale in terms of difficulty a little bit as you get further and further up the hill. That's a bit of a spoiler alert for anybody who's looking to play or GM the Catalog Sanctuary, but it is intended to get progressively deadlier, as you go further up the dreaded hills. The only problem is that when you've only got 6 HP, even the first level dungeons are going to be deadly. So it doesn't really matter how much deadlier it gets as you go as you go up the hill. I don't know, Todd, if there's anything you want to add there in terms of any thoughts you have on how we can try to balance some of those adventures.
Yeah,
or
well, I
adventures
think
as we go
maybe
through.
the one thing to note is that the characters are going to scale a little bit differently. So if in Morkborg, if you look at those character classes, you're going to have a maximum of 2 of those skills. There may be 6 or 8 of them, but you're only going to have 2 at any given time, and then at different levels, you can swap them out. And I believe in Morkborg, you do level up you do increase your attributes in some way, which you don't generally do in, say, BX or OSE. But your OSE/BX kind of characters are going to maybe have access to at high levels if they get there all 6 or 6 of the 8 or close to of all those abilities. So it's just a little bit of a different sort of thing. So from the Morkborg standpoint to the OSE standpoint, at mid levels you might, maybe at low levels you might think, well, the Morkborg character, the way it's written, may be stronger, but in terms of getting access to all the abilities, at some points the OSE character is going to get more of them, because we did want to give them more of a familiar character progression, as opposed to Morkborg, where you just kind of get you sort of just get these 2. By second level you have 2 abilities, and then the rest of the time it's just how you swap them in or out. In terms of the dungeon, a lot of that's going to be up to the GM. A lot of it's going to be context. I think, as you move further up and down things like in dungeons or hillsides or anything like that, we expect difficulty to get larger. But as Jean-Luc said, when you only have a few hit points, a goblin can kill you as quickly as a dragon can. All it takes is one roll of the dice, as the players found out during that live play when they rolled
spiked pit trap.
Spiked pit trap. I told them
6
roll
points
D6
of damage,
for damage,
done.
6 points for damage, and it was over. So it doesn't take much.
Now, what is the greatest challenge you guys have faced in this conversion situation, going from writing it from Morkborg into OSE?
I'll let you take that one, Todd. I mean, I've got some thoughts,
Okay.
some thoughts there. But,
Yeah, sure. There's a lot. I mean, I think maybe the only thing I'll talk to is that there's an expectational difference. I think people look at Morkborg and they look at the core book, right, and they have an expectation for what's going on. I think Kavlov's is very much in that vein, and I think having people come to it from an OSE background, now that frame of reference is totally different. So things that seem part and parcel of Morkborg to someone coming from an OSE background is suddenly like, oh my gosh, that's a lot, or that's powerful, or it's really weird. And trying to balance it, because you don't want to lose the flavor of the characters, right? These characters were developed for Morkborg, these classes, and we want to keep that flavor, but we don't want it to be too far afield. So from OSE, so trying to find that spot where we can hit that middle ground for keeping the flavor and keeping the abilities as much as we can, but also coming back around to say, okay, we're not totally abandoning the kind of expectations that someone may have if they come from an OSE background and then encounter this particular adventure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think a big part of it is, it's about keeping the flavor, but maybe dialing back on some of the more doom metal, sort of gruesome or ultra violent, themes. We're trying to keep a little bit of that, so there's obviously, trigger warning. There are, body horror and kind of cannibalism and sort of other, grotesque or gruesome topics, within the, that's right. We do have a content warning at the front of the book for anyone looking to purchase it. But at the same time, we want to try to make it feel a little more like OSE, right? Make it feel a bit more, progression oriented, to reward players over time. So I think that really the most difficulty we'll have is with the character classes. So trying to preserve the flavor, but make them, but adapting them to a more progression level, orientation. Everything else, I frankly speaking, and I don't know if Todd, if you can comment on that at all. But I mean, I think that the dungeons themselves, however, were written in such a way that they easily translate to OSC. In fact, like you could,
Oh yeah,
it
no,
just have to be OSC. It could be any other OSR
I think so.
or retro clone.
And I think that was something I talked about on my post-mortem stream, was that they had all these abilities when they played the game, and Jean-Luc used one of his to great effect to save one of the characters at the very beginning, and Daniel used one of his abilities to save one of their friends in the dungeon. But often the moments, the tactics that they were using to navigate and survive were really just those same tactics that anybody who's played these dungeons has done, right? Oil on the floor and lighting it, uh, putting your sort of defensive minded stronger folks in front and trying to use a doorway to hold off the enemy. Like these kinds of decisions and things were stuff that people have been playing these games, whether you play and keep on the Borderlands or any games, are going to be very familiar with. And even though they had access to all these wacky stuff, and one guy had no skin, and one guy earlier on had eaten brains out of a skull fragment, and all these things. But at the end of the day, what were they doing? All right, shields in front. Let's hold the door. Classic stuff. We'll put flaming oil to cover our escape. Can we hammer the door shut or hammer it open? Like these sorts of things. So even having all that stuff at their disposal, the dungeon still came back to those kind of tried and true tactics for survival, which is kind of part and parcel with the BX/OSE, gameplay loop experience.
Now, thinking about your post-mortem, as well as the classes, I know, I remember one of the conversations that you came up with was the fact that they had all used the classes from the book, and it sounds like that it isn't meant necessarily for them to use all those classes, maybe mix in one or two, because I know you were saying there was the one issue where I believe it was Jean-Luc, you were the good cannibal in the one situation, and then
That's
you guys
right.
had the evil cannibals in this unique narrative position that put you in the, how is it, our
Yeah,
guy's the good
it's
cannibal and they're the evil cannibal. So,
and maybe you could argue that that was a bit of a design faux pas, like that as far as Kavlov's Sanctuary is concerned. But one of the things that I thought was kind of fun was I was essentially taking of the enemies that you can encounter in Kavlov Sanctuary and essentially creating classes from them, right? So without spoiling too much, if you consider that the Blood Baron is like a vampire, there's a flesh weaver who weaves flesh, and of course there's the degenerate cannibal. All of those character classes actually reoccur as NPCs or even monsters or creatures you can fight within the narrative of some of the dungeons in the game. So to Todd's expert observation and now yours, it did generate cannibal the class in our party, going into a cannibal den and trying to save our friends. So the narrative kind of clashed a little bit, but we made it work. And in the end, Todd did something fantastic, which was gave these cannibals a unique language that they could speak, and ultimately as a result our degenerate cannibal was able to pick up on some of those things, and Todd was able to use that as a means of dropping clues for the party to kind of discover where our friends were hidden or what they were up to. So in that regard, like it kind of worked out really, really well. So I was really pleased with the way that kind of Todd put a spin on that. So yeah, it's a little bit different, but I like the way that it turned out.
Yeah, the bad cannibals were kidnapping and sacrificing people, whereas the good cannibal was only killing enemies. So there was some nuance there, but it is definitely something to
only in
consider.
gaming will you ever hear that statement.
That's right.
That's right. There's some nuance between the good and bad
And I
cannibals.
think there's also a lot to be said for the fact that like, is there such a thing as a cannibal that isn't a degenerate? Like, is there like like it's so yeah, it's for what it's worth, it was still a lot of fun, and I'm glad that it came out the way that it did.
But I think in a sandbox though, you could really play that up. It was only really an issue for me in the moment because I'm trying to put them on a particular narrative pathway, and I just had forgotten about, because I knew in advance these classes were going to be there, We wanted to show them what they were in there, and I could have picked a different mode. I just didn't. It just didn't hit me until we were kind of in it. Like, oh, shoot, we have a cannibal, and I think it was because they like we have a cannibal on our team, and they have cannibals on their team. Like, oh, I didn't even think about it. But in the sandbox, you can have a lot of fun with that. What does this cannibal do? Is he related to those cannibals? Were they from a similar
Same
cannibal
cult,
sect that's
or
split
yeah,
up? Like, you can in the sandbox part of it, you can really have as much fun with that and go as deep as you're willing and able to go. With that, it was only really an issue because I was trying to create this sort of narrow one shot, right? And if I was
right.
running this again, say for a convention, maybe I wouldn't have the degenerate cannibal as a class, or I would have it in there but have some kind of note. I would just want to, as a GM, you just want to kind of anticipate that, right? And that was one of a case in which I didn't anticipate it, but it worked out fine. But I think in terms of overall, like the sandbox,
Yeah.
I think it ends up being something that's really fun, where these aren't necessarily all strangers. It could be that this player is related to those, and then you can really have fun with that concept. And where do you go from there, right? Because they
Yeah,
don't have to be enemies. They don't have to be at
exactly.
cross
That's what it opens
purposes.
the door. That's what it opens the door up for. Is sort of, you've got reaction tables in Morkborg, and this and very similar, if not identical, reaction tables in OSC. And I think that this kind of lends an air to, like, not every not every scenario in a game has to end in combat, and so by having a cannibal in your party, and then now suddenly you're entering a cannibal den, it kind of opens up the door for more social aspects of the game, right? And so maybe you can negotiate as a cannibal, or do other sorts of things to exchange for, or maybe even befriend these cannibals, and start working with them in their cause, or what have you. So lots of different interesting ways to kind of play that off.
Now, while we're on the discussion of the classes, I know you were talking about the flavor of the setting. This is definitely where there's just dripping of unique flavor through these classes. And going back to what you had been talking about earlier with the horror, this book isn't written, this is intended to be horror, but especially in reading the classes is where you get some of those sides where it just goes so far through the uncanny valley of horror that you end up getting into this like unintentional funny place, like your degenerate cannibal and his tapeworm familiar. That one I love referencing a
Yeah.
lot. And just while where did you come up with these ideas for these classes? And while you're doing that, I'm going to be showing a tasteful image that I saw recently on Twitter. That is what came to mind kind of at the idea of where the degenerate cannibal's tapeworm familiar, how it behaves. So
Yeah, I mean, so, this is going to sound awful, but and if for anybody who either didn't catch the live stream, please do, on Todd's channel. What you'll notice is the entire time we're playing, I'm cackling. I've got a twisted sense of humor, and I don't know what it was, but just these sorts of things where, whether you've got no skin, as a result of being skinned alive, and but kept alive, or having a tapeworm as a familiar. Like, I think that that's hilarious. Now, for some people, of course, body dysmorphia and all of these kinds of things can be quite horrific, and I try to, and I'm not trying to make light of the sort of horror that's written in the book, but yeah, I like to think that it's just so over the top that it really is quite funny. Another prime example of that is, for instance, as the flesh weaver, I believe, you have an ability called parental stitching, where you can stitch together, a sort of adolescent child. And we had one in the game, and Todd just had me doubling over because there's I think a 2 in 6 chance to be rebuffed by this child as you try to command it. And so he was kind of giving us the, it's just, we would ask him to go and fight someone. And he would just say, "No way, man." Or you're not even my real mother. And these kinds of ridiculous things. So just over the top for me. I just think that these things are hilarious. So yeah, that's primarily where it comes from. It was just trying to be funny more than anything.
now, what were your inspirations for this scenario? From not the keep on the borderland side of D&D, but from the horror inspirations, and why Sanctuary and sort of the religious cult that is sort of your home base here. What were the inspirations for that and some of the classes?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I think that I leaned a lot. I mean, um, so without getting into it too much, like I grew up Christian, but eventually or Catholic. Yeah, it's one of those things where I moved away from religion very at a very young age. But you could argue that I'm agnostic or Buddhist or spiritual. I've kind of delved into a few other sort of theologies, and for me, the quintessential, good versus evil, is what I try to make Kavlov Sanctuary sort of all about, right? Whether, yeah, there's some sort of religious allegory kind of dotted throughout the adventure, if you will. But I would say maybe some of that was probably inspired by a little bit from B2 Keeping the Borderlands, and then yeah, I mean it's good versus evil, and I wanted to make sure that players could go either route, right? Whether you're for Kavlov, right, or whether you're for Balthazar, which is the demon that is ultimately trying to
Mhm.
escape. I wanted to make sure that players had the choice, right? So yeah, it's just that the duality of good versus evil, and I think that religion, although it is kind of an overused trope in that regard, because you've got the angels and devils and things like that. It was very easy for me to kind of lean on because I wasn't being very specific throughout the book, right? There's a
Mhm.
demon and there's this sorcerer, but that's pretty much it. Outside of that, I don't really go into it a whole lot. As far as how that kind of plays into the classes, I would say it probably doesn't really a lot. I wasn't really thinking of the good and sort of evil aspects of the character classes as I was creating them. I really just wanted to do something that was kind of grotesque and funny and over the top, to kind of grab people's attention. Again, originally these were created from Morkborg, so that was very much in the flavor of Morkborg. So I'm super curious to see what the how people are going to kind of take this on for OSC, because it's considerably different than what you would typically expect. Like you've
Yes.
got a fighter. You look at the OSC fighter, which okay, yeah, their THAC0 is increasing considerably over levels, but outside of that, there's really very little flavor in terms of like or abilities that they have access to, right? So these character classes are far more flavorful, and some people might not like that, as a result. But I think that it's a lot of fun. But yeah, the good and the evil stuff didn't really come into play when it came to creating the characters.
Well, and not just the good versus evil, but I was wondering what was your like Appendix N inspiration for the book. If there was anything in particular that you wanted to draw in here specifically as a shout out as an inspiration.
I mean, not particularly. Like as far as horror is concerned, I love the sort of Cthulhu-esque sort of like out of body planar sort of experiences and stuff like that. I watched a lot of horror movies as a boy, and I eventually grew to actually really dislike horror. My partner will tell you that I can't sit down and watch a horror movie for the life of me because I just get so scared. But watching all sorts of horror movies, which names escape me when I was I mean, obviously The Exorcist and things like this. The gentleman with all the nails taken out of his head, which was absolutely terrifying. So stuff like that, I would say, is what I leaned on a lot. Um, Maybe you could say that the body horror also is a little bit cheap, in that regards, because it gets a lot of reaction out of folks, but isn't very, super well thought out. But that's sort of what I leaned into a lot.
Mhm. Nice. Um, Now, before we end, because I know it's 6 o'clock now, is there anything specifically that we haven't covered that you'd like to make sure people are aware of as far as the Kickstarter is concerned?
Thank you, yeah, for asking. That's a great question. I mean, we can talk a little bit about the Kickstarter,
Oh,
just
yeah.
briefly here. Yeah, and just in terms of like what people can expect. One of the things we definitely didn't want to do with this campaign was alienate the Morkborg crowd that helped fund the initial book, and that we're essentially converting for. So, for instance, for anybody who's either already purchased or who has access to the OSC edition, or sorry, the Morkborg edition of the book, we're also going to be creating like a bare bones edition, for the OSC version, which is to say that If you've already owned the Morkborg version, or if, let's just say, you don't care for the narrative at all, right? You just want to have access to the character classes, the items, the monsters, the maps, but none of the narrative fluff. The bare bones edition is going to be fantastic for that. Because you're just getting the meat and nothing else. We've also got a ton of stretch goals for additional content. So whether it's rumors, items, we've got 2 new character classes, which we're super excited for. And even stretch goals for Todd to create additional content. What I plan to do actually is, for any of the new stuff that we create, is to create it for Morkborg as well. And so we'll likely be looking at the logistics of maybe releasing that out to anybody who purchased the book on Drive-Thru RPG, for instance, to get access to some of that content as well, at no cost. So things like the rumors, for instance, and things like that. And finally, one of the things that I'm probably most excited for is the limited edition cover, right? So, we talked a little bit about how Drive-Thru RPG quality. Although I personally still think is fantastic, right, for the value that you're getting. We're doing a limited edition cover using Lucas's art as the full cover as a sort of splash art, and we're doing a limited edition print run for that, where we're going to have the sewn binding. We're going to have uncoated paper, so just a higher quality product. And we're only going to be selling those in sort of limited quantities as well. So maybe between 50 and to 150, sort of all depending on the appeal. So those are things that I think that folks are going to be really sort of excited for. In fact, that I've been sort of asked, personally on social media, hey, we love the content, but we just don't personally care for, the print on demand books, right? Are you going to be doing anything else? And so as a result of that, we are. So I'm really excited about that. I don't know, Todd, if there's anything I'm forgetting or missing, or anything you'd like to add.
I think you got it covered pretty well. And I think when's the go live date? It's the
that's right. The August 4th. Yeah.
Oh,
So
August
4th. Yeah.
Yep, so
that's
that'll
right.
be this Friday. So
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
I'm gonna be in Gen Con on the day of the launch. So I'm hopeful
really
I'm gonna be So I'm gonna be stopping by the Morkborg or Free League booth and trying to get myself some goodies there, and meeting with some of the folks over at Drive-Thru RPG as well. So some of the their services folks there that have just been so helpful for to me over the year. But yeah, so that's gonna be a lot of fun.
Oh, that's outstanding. Now, are you guys generally going to be at Gen Con over the years, or?
I've never been,
Okay.
so maybe next year will be my first time.
Okay.
I'll be here at home. I have been doing PAXs, and I should be at PAX Unplugged coming up in December.
I'm glad you say that, because I will likely be there as well. I was just looking at how much it was going to cost me, and I think that it's in the books for this calendar year. But yeah, it's my first time personally going to Gen Con. It's something that I wanted to do. I'm really excited for it as well. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, that's outstanding. Yeah. And any particular social media that you guys want to plug?
Todd, go for it.
Oh, sure. I'm pretty much either Hexed Press or Hexed Pressman, depending on where you find me. But I guess YouTube's probably the place to start, which is just at Hexed Press on YouTube. And then from there, you probably will see links to other things. But that's probably the best place to start. Or you can go to hex.press, which is my website, or forums.hex.press for my forums.
You can find me at the Dungeons Key on I was gonna say on Twitter. I don't know if it's X now. Like, what do we call it? At least I'm there. I'm there for now. We'll see how long that lasts.
Insert concerned groan here.
So, yeah, exactly. I'm You can find me at the Dungeons Key on the Garbage Fire. I don't know what else to call it. At Twitter, on X, on Instagram, on Threads, as well. And you can always hit me up on my website as well. TheDungeonsKey.com. We've got a mailing list that we're trying to grow
Excellent.
to get as much attention as possible. Where we'll hopefully kind of keep people apprised of our upcoming projects. This conversion of Catalog Sanctuary is just one of a few projects we've got going. I'm working on a second book, that's directly related to Catalog Sanctuary, sort of an expansion, if you will, of the bog itself. And I've got a lot of art already trickling in for that, and writing. You'll be able to find out about another project I've got to create like a sort of a sci-fi, Starship Troopers inspired TTRPG gaming system, which I'm really excited for, and anything else that we're working on, right? Whether it's discounts for upcoming projects or things like that, you name it. So the mailing list is super helpful for us. So anybody who's interested in any of the work that we're doing should go and check it out.
All right, and all of that is in your press kit as well, correct? All those social media links.
Yep, you got it.
Yep. So the press kit for the Kickstarter will also be linked below, as well as all their social media links, as well as the direct link to the Kickstarter as well. So please go check it out. Hopefully this gets you a lot of good support.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for being
and
here.
actually, just before I forget, we do have a writing sample as well. That'll be available on that'll be available on the Kickstarter as well. But we've made the so for both OSC and Morkborg, we've made the Fleshweaver class and the degenerate, the Cannibal's Den dungeon available to everyone. So the same one that Todd streamed with us is available. So we'll be available through that writing sample as well.
Outstanding. Yep. And all that will hopefully I'll remember to make sure everything is included and will be linked below in the meantime.
Amazing.
Well, thank you guys for being here. It was great talking to you all. If I can keep you on for a couple minutes later.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
No, it was
having me.
fantastic. Thanks so much for having us, Dave. It was a fantastic opportunity. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you all. So we're going to be ending our stream here. Again, everybody go to the Kickstarter. It goes live August 4th. See y'all next time. Don't forget to hit like, comment, subscribe, and see you on the next video, everyone.
Thanks,
Adios.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.